Hey there, true crime fans. Welcome back to For Criming Out Loud and our bedtime series called Crime Me to Sleep. We've been reading While Idaho Slept, and this is the 9th episode. So if you're new here, make sure you subscribe. That way you can go back into the playlists and start really any of our true crime books that we've covered from the very beginning. Let's get into episode 9 of While Idaho Slept. Part 8, Chapter 39. The youngest of Michael and Marianne Koberger's 3 children, Brian Christopher Koberger, was born in November of 1994 in the remote Pocono Mountains region of Monroe County, Pennsylvania. The area was known for its forested ridges and lush green valleys dotted with summer cabins and freshwater lakes, and for NASCAR races at the Pocono Raceway, less than 10 miles away in Long Pond. On NASCAR weekends, the cars were so loud they could be heard across the mountains in Albrightsville, where Brian eventually lived. But there was the other Poconos too, a landscape of repressed economies and rural decline in the wake of the decades-old collapse of the steel industry, an area of rampant drug abuse now. Opioids were the most commonly used, but this often led to heroin because it was cheaper. Koberger's parents both worked for the local Pleasant Valley school system. His father had been a maintenance worker and his mother a paraprofessional attending to special needs children. Their jobs were stable but not high-paying, and the family had sometimes struggled financially. The Kobergers filed for bankruptcy protection in 1995, the year after Brian was born, and again in 2010 when he was a teenager. The family first lived in a box-shaped 2-story home in the conservative-leaning community of Effort, population approximately 2,000. They would eventually live in several homes in various towns within the county. The Pleasant Valley Middle and High School District was colloquially known as Pregnant Valley, according to one of Koberger's classmates, because of the exceptionally high birth rate among pre-high school grads in the area. A young woman who often sat beside Koberger on the bus through most of his junior and high school years remembers chatting with him at the bus stop each morning while they waited for their ride. He was nerdy, she says, focused on getting good grades and not into the social scene, and she was often bullied at school as well as on the bus. It was an experience she and Koberger shared. They were both outcasts, and this became the crux of their relationship. It was the same route for 6 or 7 years, says the young woman, who didn't want her name used in print, and the same bullies repeatedly harassed her. Adding insult to injury, the Pleasant Valley school lockers were assigned alphabetically, so the bullies whose names started with the same letter as hers were inescapable year after year. Koberger had the same problems, she says. It was insanity, and the school did not give a shit about bullying at all. If you weren't popular or a jock, you didn't mean shit to anybody there. She recalls Koberger wandering through his days with his earbuds in, blocking out the bullying and general boredom with music, especially on the bus ride home. He listened to emo-type shit and screamo, the young woman says. But he also listened to R&B and pop, too. Kind of everything. She knows this because they had talked about their shared passion for music, another thing that bonded them as friends. Although the school district required uniforms at the time, primarily khakis and blue, white, or black polo-style shirts, she remembers there was nothing else especially regimented about its academic policies. Administrators reportedly turned a blind eye to the area's drug problems, as well as to the frequent violence on school grounds. There were always fights. It was ridiculous to survive there, the young woman says, remembering that many of the students in her and Koberger's grade were transplants from more dangerous areas in New York, less than 2 hours away. Their parents, she guessed, had been trying to remove them from city violence, but it seemed to her like they'd brought some of it with them to Pleasant Valley. There was like a fight every day when we were in school, she adds, noting that the early years of high school were particularly hard. He got bullied in school because our school was horrible. When the story about Koberger's arrest first made headlines, she was dumbfounded. She pulled up a single article on the case, but couldn't believe what she was reading. I was like, there's no fucking way, she says. Since then, she hadn't looked at anything about the case online. I kind of want to give him the benefit of the doubt here. Choking up, she adds, I'm really hoping he didn't do this. All her school memories about Koberger were relatively pleasant ones. He was somebody who had kept her company through difficult years. They weren't romantically involved. In fact, Koberger had never dated anybody that she could remember, and she and Koberger didn't even socialize much outside of school, but they had shared a mutual understanding as recipients of the same hostility. It had seemed like they cared about each other's peace of mind, and that was something she had valued. I'm just shocked, she says. I never in 1,000 years would have pictured this. Like, knowing the person I knew, I never saw this coming. She sounds close to tears. Everybody starts out as a kid, and she can't imagine that the kid Brian Koberger was had somehow become a monster. I could be wrong, but I'm hoping, she says, just because he was a weird kid who was my friend. We were both weird. We were both outcasts. We were both bullied. She is honoring her friendship with the young Brian Koberger by reserving judgment on the Brian Koberger that she no longer knows. She believes she owes him that. The murders were another thing altogether. Nobody deserves that, she says. What happened was horrific, and she doesn't like to think about it. From a young age, when she'd first known him, Koberger was heavy. By late junior high, his body image was noticeably affecting his confidence and social life, and he was already inherently socially awkward, so he didn't have an easy time fitting into the mainstream population. It didn't help that, like his friend on the bus, he was an intelligent student in a struggling school district. The number of high school students testing at reading proficiency levels was under 40%, and college preparedness was below Pennsylvania's state average. Most students didn't even try to further their education. While he was in Pleasant Valley High in sleepy Broadheadsville, where students from several surrounding townships convened, Koberger didn't have many friends, and he was striking out with girls. Another of his fellow high school students, Deja Mann, told a New York Post reporter, if he tried to flirt with a girl or anything, they'd get a weird feeling in their stomach. I had that feeling towards him too. She couldn't explain why, but added, my instinct was creeper vibes, and I tried to keep my distance from him. Another student, Ashley Cormaz, who was 2 years older than Koberger at Pleasant Valley, explained to the Post, I don't want to say he was weird, but he didn't have any social skills and didn't know how to make friends. He was just really awkward. Then she adds, Brian just wanted to fit in with the popular kids. Chapter 40. In photographs from his early high school years, Koberger's weight was noticeable. According to the Idaho Statesman interviews with one of his closest friends from the time, Thomas Arntz, Koberger weighed close to 300 pounds. Arntz and Koberger were both social misfits, the type to keep to themselves, and would walk through the nearby woods together or play video games. Koberger was witty and noticed things that others usually didn't, and Arntz enjoyed that at first. But Arntz remembered his friend aiming for more, acceptance by his popular classmates, a fit body, and perhaps a future career as either an Army Ranger or a police officer. While enrolled at Pleasant Valley High School, Koberger also took law enforcement classes at Monroe Career and Technical Institute. He had begun to work out obsessively, according to Arntz, taking kickboxing classes, jogging, and changing his diet. He was even photographed in a school-issued police-style uniform for the yearbook, doing push-ups. And his personality seemed to change at the time. His wit became sharper, more driven by what seemed agitation. He had begun to annoy his close friend. He always wanted to be dominant physically and intellectually, Arntz told the Statesman. He had to show that he was smarter and bigger, and try to put me down and make me feel insecure about myself. So much of that was a torment, and I didn't want to be around him anymore. Koberger had seemingly become more arrogant as he physically transformed himself. He looked good, with thick dark hair and a fit physique. His face became more chiseled, and he began to carry himself with a confidence in his physicality. But it felt to Arntz that Koberger was weaponizing his newfound sense of self. And he had stopped hanging out with the girl he'd ridden the bus with for so many years. He was now trying to spend more time with the popular kids who had bullied her. She sat with her girlfriends now. Another friend, Dominique Clark, said that Koberger had become so odd around girls that several had started to think of him as a creep. If he liked or was interested in a girl and she wasn't, he didn't understand why, or he just didn't accept her saying no, Clark told the Post, adding, he just didn't really fit in with anybody. Some of those same girls had reportedly bullied him earlier in his high school career, another of his classmates, Sarah Healy, had said. And now he was trying to date some of them, batting out of his league, as the expression went. He seemed overly confident. Under the surface, however, Brian Koberger was still struggling. For years, he had apparently been suffering from a neurological condition that was slowly playing with his mind. The condition, called visual snow syndrome, sometimes causes everything in one's field of vision to appear within a haze of static, like an old TV screen when the reception is poor. Symptoms include seeing flickering black dots and other visual disturbances, such as starbursts or afterimages, sometimes coinciding with a ringing in the ears and migraines. As a teenager, Koberger posted in the online forum community Tapatalk that he was plagued by a, quote, mind fizzle, unquote, like he had demons in his head, constantly mocking him. In the spring of 2011, when he was 16 years old, he posted, I always feel as if I'm not there, completely depersonalized. He listed the following as comorbidities of the visual snow he had been experiencing. The list is taken from Tapatalk, where Koberger's photo, date of birth, and email address were used to verify his identity. And then here's the list. Fog. Lack of comprehension at some times. Feel like my life is a movie. Depersonalization. Depression. No interest in activity. Constant thought of suicide. Crazy thoughts. Delusions of grandeur. Anxiety. Poor self-image. Poor social skills. No emotion. I feel like nothing has a point to it. When I get home, I am mean to my family. This started when visual snow did. I feel no emotion, and along with the depersonalization, I can say and do whatever I want with little remorse. Everyone hates me pretty much because I'm an asshole. He talked to another user about experiencing palinopsia. I'm so sorry, you guys. Palinopsia. Continuing to see an image after it is already gone. If a banana were moved across a table, for instance, the trail of the movement would continue to appear after the banana had come to rest. Palinopsia is the least of my worries, Koberger said. I took Topamax before, and it just made me insane. I broke my table for no reason, seriously. When I was on Topamax, I did crazy shit that I should have died from. Research based on case studies shows that Topamax improves symptoms of visual snow by only 15%. According to the Mayo Clinic, Topamax is also used to treat seizures, but its side effects can include blurred vision, confusion, uncontrolled back and forth or rolling eye movements, double vision, memory problems, aggression, agitation, sadness or emptiness, and ringing in the ears. He tried taking the herbal supplement ginkgo biloba, and he felt this offered some relief. He had also tried an anti-inflammatory diet, and while he thought the dietary change and the exercising he'd become obsessive about were helping, they didn't substantively change his condition. He posted frequently on Tapatalk, where he found sympathy from many others experiencing very similar visual snow-related symptoms. Together, they theorized about ways to curb their condition when medical professionals could not. Still, the cognitive, psychological, and visual issues persisted. I feel blank and so generic. I can barely remember my eventful childhood, Koberger said. As I try to think of my childhood, I become depressed. He was still just a kid, barely the legal driving age, and yet he was mourning the inability to remember his youth. Something major is wrong with me, he posted, according to a report by Vanity Fair. I am just a blank soul. By his senior year, Koberger had lost so much weight that he had needed surgery to remove the excess skin from his torso, friends claimed. His face now looked sunken, his shirt collars hanging from a frail-looking neck. His skin had even paled, and he'd continued to be socially awkward. And he was no longer taking law enforcement courses at the Career and Technical Institute. Instead, he was studying the HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, that his father was certified in. When the Idaho Statesman looked into why Koberger had made the transition away from police work, an administrator of the program alluded to disciplinary issues. In general, a student can be very strong academically, the administrator said, but one or more infractions would take the opportunity to participate in that program away. In addition to shifting his academics focus, Koberger reportedly stopped attending in-person classes and finished his high school career online. He was drifting even further from the center of that social circle he had longed for and fought hard to be a part of. And he had started using heroin, his friends said. Chapter 41. Koberger was hardly alone in his drug use. Heroin was outpacing all other illegal drugs in Monroe County's drug abuse and crime-related statistics of the time. It was a neighbor named Jerry Saba, living just 2 doors down from Koberger's family, who the Idaho Statesman said had gotten Koberger started. Saba eventually died of an accidental drug overdose, according to the Monroe County coroner, as did several other of Kohberger's associates, all in their 20s. As Kohberger fell into addiction, the few relationships he had managed to maintain were falling apart. "I think drugs goofed him pretty bad," said Jack Bayless, who claimed to have been one of Kohberger's closest friends from the period, in a Statesman interview. "He'd tell me, 'I'm clean now, I'm totally clean now,' and he'd have bleeding track marks on his arms." At 19, he was bumming rides from friends like Casey Arntz, Thomas Arntz's sister, saying he needed to run errands, then buying needles and supply. Arntz told reporters that Kohberger had claimed to need a ride because his car had broken down. She didn't know he'd been using her to score or that she had drugs in her car on the ride home. When she found out, she laid into him in a Facebook message, upset that he had put her at risk of getting charged with drug and paraphernalia possession if they had been caught in a traffic stop. According to Arntz, Kohberger responded, "I'm in rehab." And apparently he was. When he got out, he started taking courses at Northampton Community College in Monroe County. He was studying psychology. Sometime around 2015, he went on a Tinder date with a young woman named Haley. After Kohberger was arrested, she used TikTok to tell the world her story of their night together, and then later appeared on multiple networks to tell it again. She said the date was going relatively smoothly at first. They went to a theater to see an action movie, and Kohberger was behaving politely. He was quiet, but not unusually so, and he held the door for her when they entered the theater. After the movie, Kohberger drove Haley back to her dorm at nearby Penn State Hazleton. He invited himself inside, and Haley decided that that would be fine. She was not interested in having sex with him, but she was open to extending their evening. They watched another movie on Netflix. Kohberger, she said, kept tickling her and trying to touch her in other small ways, which she didn't like. When she asked him to stop and confronted him about putting his hands on her, Kohberger turned almost grave. "I'm not touching you," he said. Haley now wanted to get him out of her dorm room. Like him, she was socially awkward, and instead of simply asking him to leave, she pretended she needed to use the bathroom. Kohberger followed her and stood outside the door. Feeling more and more uncomfortable, Haley pretended to throw up, and the plan worked. Eventually, Kohberger texted her that he was leaving. An hour later, out of nowhere, Kohberger texted Haley to tell her that she had good birthing hips. That's weird. Creeped out, she ended her contact with him. Sometime after that, Kohberger briefly dropped out of community college to go to rehab again. His friends from that period said he had continued to struggle with drugs, but when he got clean for the second time, it appeared to stick. He renewed his coursework at Northampton while also working for his old high school as a backup custodian and part-time security guard. He was 22. By 24, he had earned his associate's degree in psychology. By now, Michael and Marianne Kohberger had moved their family to the 3-bedroom home in Albrightsville, still in Monroe County. The house, although 2 stories, was on the smaller side at approximately 1,300 square feet, but it sat on an acre of wooded land in a community of similarly tidy homes. It was a nice, orderly place to live. Kohberger enrolled in DeSales University in Center Valley, 45 minutes from his family home, and pursued his bachelor's degree, also in psychology. The thought of using heroin soon disgusted him, he said in a Facebook message with his friend Jack Bayless, who would later share those messages with the New York Times. I only used when I was in a deep suicidal state, Koberger wrote. I have since really learned a lot. Not a person alive could convince me to use it. Around that same time, according to employment records subpoenaed from the Pleasant Valley School District, Koberger had become a diligent and dependable security guard, working the weekend shifts to make sure his old high school was buttoned up properly. He even helped save the life of a staff member having a medical emergency. Koberger graduated from his program at DeSales in 2020, having earned a bachelor's degree in psychology, but remained at DeSales to obtain his master's. He shifted his focus from psychology to criminal justice for his graduate studies, and he was in the right place to do so. DeSales University had a renowned criminal justice program. It even had a crime scene house on campus, which was used for homicide simulations and the collection of evidence. And it had Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a forensic psychologist and an expert in serial killers. Ramsland had spent many years corresponding with the famous or infamous BTK killer. The two eventually collaborated on a book, Confessions of a Serial Killer. Ramsland had also written many other books exploring the darkest reaches of the criminal mind, attempting to understand human predators and mass murderers. She was one of Koberger's professors. The former heroin addict was a star student, according to another of his professors, and in 2022 received his master's degree after a 2-year study program. He was then accepted into Washington State University's PhD program in criminal justice and criminology, where he had also been awarded a teaching assistantship. His life seemed to be turning around. On Reddit that summer, reportedly as part of finishing his DeSales master's thesis, Koberger posted a survey he had devised, soliciting criminal offenders to participate in a research project that seeks to understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making when committing a crime. This study seeks to understand the story behind your most recent criminal offense, he wrote, with an emphasis on your thoughts and feelings throughout your experience. Survey questions included: why did you choose that victim or target over others? Did you prepare for the crime before leaving home? How did you approach the victim or target? After arriving, what steps did you take prior to locating the victim or target? After committing the crime, what were you thinking and feeling? How did you leave the scene? And last, how was your life right before the crime occurred? Chapter 42. Further examination of the initial Koberger traffic stop in Indiana shows sunshine on the face of Michael Koberger in the passenger seat of the white Hyundai sedan beside his only son. They were stopped on the shoulder of a highway, and Michael had unrolled his window for the sheriff's deputy who approached them. Then he had pushed aside the visor that had been south-facing to try to block the shine coming through the passenger side front window. Michael's mouth was slightly parted, as if forming a question. Brian looked tense, his whole body tight-seeming, his face rigid in anticipation of learning why his vehicle had been stopped. "You was right up on that van, man," the deputy had said to Brian, whose face seemed to relax. The Hyundai's plates had recently been registered in Washington state. The officer asked where they had been driving to. "They were looking for Thai food," said Brian, pointing forward. But then his father explained they'd been driving cross-country, actually. "Well, coming from WSU," Michael had said, using his thumb to point backward. He seemed proud of his son's education, made small talk about the university. Brian nodded his head, clean-shaven, briefly looking straight forward while his father talked. Michael's chin had a row of gray hairs across the lower ridge that looked bristly in the shade of the officer's body, which now partially blocked the sun. Brian seemed ready to go, but his father was uncomfortably allowing the interaction to linger. During the second stop of the Koberger men in Indiana, this time only 10 minutes later by a state trooper, Michael, with the sun now directly in his face, like a hot flash through his eyeglasses, looked genuinely confused in the body cam footage. His window was unrolled and his head was cocked backwards, his mouth fully open. Brian seemed confused as well, and wound even more tightly now. His mouth was open, and his deeply set eyes seemed full of question marks. He kept his hands on the knees of his blue jeans, in plain sight of the trooper. Again, he had been told that he was tailgating, and again, Michael made more small talk. But beneath the drone of white noise from both the road and the conversation his father was having, Brian looked as if his skin were crawling. By the end of that month, Michael and his wife Mary Ann would stand gobsmacked in their family home after police had shattered their windows and breached their doors, and dozens of tactical assets had stormed their house. The cops had seized personal items and documents. They had seized portions of their son's white Hyundai Elantra, and worst of all, the cops had seized their son. On January 3rd, 2023, Michael and Marianne Koberger arrived at the Monroe County Courthouse to witness their son's extradition hearing. He was being sent back to Idaho, where he would be charged with 4 counts of first-degree homicide in what was the nation's most publicized murder investigation. The idea must have been unthinkable to them. They were dropped off outside the courthouse in a black SUV. Michael wore a black medical-style mask covering his face and a trapper hat with ear flaps, and an extended bill pulled low to shade his eyes, presumably from the media cameras pointed in their direction. His wife's face was similarly obscured by a black mask and the faux fur-lined hood of her black winter coat, which was pulled tightly around her head. Brian Koberger, shackled and handcuffed, wearing a red jailhouse jumper, was led into the courthouse by sheriff's deputies, who held him by the arm. His parents and 2 sisters, both in their early 30s, watched from the gallery. Reporters who had been allowed in the room without their cameras said that Koberger had mouthed, "I love you," to his family. His public defender at the time, Jason Labar, had issued a statement to the media on his behalf. "Mr. Koberger is eager to be exonerated of these charges and looks forward to resolving these matters as promptly as possible," Labar said. In a later interview with NBC, Labar added that the family don't believe it to be Brian. They can't believe this. They're obviously shocked. And their lives have been upended. In the ensuing months, photos of the Kobergers showing up for their son's hearing would spread across social media and traditional media outlets. The paparazzi also snuck through the woods toward the family home and took pictures and photos with long lenses, including several of Koberger's father cleaning up the mess left behind after the law enforcement raid. He wore utility gloves and used a shop vacuum to suction shards of glass from the lawn. His broken windows now had duct tape across them, covering the holes. He wore a gray sweatshirt with a graphic on the back that read, "Life is good." Weeks after Koberger's arrest, his family posted a now widely disseminated statement in response to the media attention on them. First and foremost, we care deeply for the 4 families who have lost their precious children. There are no words that can adequately express the sadness we feel, and we pray each day for them, they wrote. We will continue to let the legal process unfold, and as a family, we will love and support our son and brother. Then they asked for privacy. In previous years, Mary Ann Koberger had written op-eds for the local newspaper, speaking out against school shootings, abortion, and the death penalty. She had also frequently taken to Reddit, posting about the anxiety she felt over her son's future. She worried about his lack of friendships, his lack of direction. On the day that Brian Koberger left to pursue his PhD, Mary Ann wrote to a fellow Reddit user, "My son will be in Pullman in the eastern part of the state, quite close to the Idaho border. He knows absolutely no one, and we have no family there. I worry about him being lonely." It was just a mother, after all, looking after her son and looking forward to the future she presumed him to be building for himself. He was 28, but still her boy, off to school and out of her reach. Chapter 43. Brian Koberger's 2-bedroom apartment at the Steptoe Village complex in Pullman, Washington, was on the second floor of a 12-plex unit that was essentially divided in half, with 6 units on each side of the building. Up the center of Koberger's half ran an outdoor stairwell with a landing on each floor, where a bicycle could be locked or conversation made between tenants. Koberger moved into Unit G-201 in the summer of 2022 and began to get used to living in Pullman among the quaint city's population of approximately 34,000, including its Washington State University students. The campus abutted Pullman's old downtown area, which was sleepy, its coffee shops and sprawling used bookstore inhabiting a few tree-lined blocks along the abandoned Moose Lodge building and other architectural relics of a century ago. The Criminal Justice and Criminology Department was inside Wilson Short Hall, a stone and brick centerpiece with an ornate entryway across from the Student Union. Koberger's office, a perk of his teaching assistantship, was on the below-ground floor of Wilson Short. Early in his first semester at WSU, Koberger became acquainted with his second-floor neighbor, Christian Martinez, a tough-looking military veteran who had a large, ornate tattoo covering the front of his neck like a tapestry. Koberger seemed to enjoy talking to Martinez about criminology, Martinez told the Long Crime Network months later. They weren't good friends, Martinez said, but they were friendly and would chat on the landing between their apartments. He would talk about his studies, like forensics and stuff, and criminology stuff, Martinez said. Nothing had seemed particularly unusual about that. The week before school started, "I met his dad in the parking lot," Martinez said. His dad was wanting to introduce me, or something like that, introduce me to Brian, and he said something, I don't remember the exact word he used to describe him, but it was something like, he had a hard time making friends, or he's kind of shy. Martinez's wife, however, didn't have a good feeling about Koberger. She felt like something was off, the way the hairs on the back of a human neck can sometimes stand up in danger. She didn't like her husband interacting with their new neighbor. But Martinez himself hadn't picked up on anything amiss. He wanted to help Koberger integrate more, and even invited him to a pool party in nearby Moscow. A fellow partygoer named Zach Cartwright, who had met Koberger there, told Law and Crime that the criminology student seemed socially awkward, standing off to the side of festivities and observing instead of participating. But then a month later, Cartwright had a chance encounter with Koberger while both were hiking on a local trail. Koberger remembered exactly who Cartwright was, even though they had barely spoken at the pool party. It was really weird how he approached me and the people I was with, because he acted kind of like we were best friends, Cartwright said. Like it was like a reunion or something. He was really excited to see us, and I had no idea really who he was right at that second. Koberger was not fitting in socially, not in his extracurricular activities, and not within his teaching assistantship and PhD program. While he paid rigorous attention in his criminology courses, he seemed to make fellow students uncomfortable. B.K. Norton, who shared 4 classes with Koberger, told the Seattle Times, "Brian was incredibly smart and talked about things that impassioned him, but there was just something off about him." According to Norton, Koberger had made disparaging remarks about the queer community, which had alienated his peers in the relatively liberal-leaning Pullman. "I didn't socialize with him because he had made anti-LGBTQ comments, and I am a queer individual," Norton said, and she told the New York Times, "He sort of creeped people out because he stared and he didn't talk much, but when he did, it was very intelligent and he needed everyone to know he was smart." Another student told the Times that Koberger had been a mansplainer who was argumentative with his classmates, particularly women. Some of Koberger's students in the criminal law class he was helping to teach felt the same about his attitudes towards women. Several said that they were treated disparagingly and graded more harshly than their male counterparts. One said that Koberger had followed her to her car. Not even a month into the semester, WSU had reportedly opened an investigation into student complaints against Koberger. At the same time, he was being reprimanded for argumentative behavior with a workplace supervisor, the criminal law professor John Snyder, who was in charge of Koberger's assistantship. He had several verbal altercations with Snyder, and according to a leaked file, he was put on an improvement plan for violating, quote, "norms of professional behavior," unquote. On campus, Koberger appeared to remain a lone wolf. Multiple students told news sources that he was seen several times in the student union building staring at his fellow students. But he was also seen in another student union building across state lines at the University of Idaho, although he had no known scholarly, social, or professional business to conduct there. He wouldn't look away if you caught him staring, a sophomore named Chelsea had told People.com about seeing Koberger at the U of I campus. Like he wanted you to notice that he was looking at you. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't say anything, he just stared. Another student said almost the same thing, that Koberger was in the student union building at U of I and was really intense staring. He made me uncomfortable. This pattern of awkward behavior around women, followed by rejection, had been emerging for over a decade now. That semester, an investigative source told People.com, Koberger slipped into the Instagram DMs of one of the young women who lived in the King Road house. He messaged her repeatedly. "Hey, how are you?" he asked. She didn't answer. Well, that wraps up episode 9. If you are enjoying this content, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Also, if you'd like to reach out to me, you can contact me through my webpage at forcrimingoutloudshop.com. Thank you guys so much for being here. I truly appreciate your support in this new series, Crime Me to Sleep. Till next time, good night.